Welcome to Politically Basic. I'm your host, Kyle Campbell. We're breaking down the basics of all political issues and current political events so that you get to decide. Today on the show, I've got with me your favorite political insider and mine, electoral college expert Trent England. He's the founder and executive director of Save Our States. He also serves as co-chairman of the Stop Ranked Choice Voting Coalition and is the David and Ann Brown Distinguished Fellow at the Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs. He produced the feature-length documentary Safeguard, an electoral college story, and co-authored the book The Case Against Ranked Choice Voting, which we're going to dig into today. We're covering the topic of ranked choice voting, what it is, where it's being used, and how it affects the way some American voters, even you, may be casting your ballot soon. Trent, thanks so much for being with me on the show today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, Kyle.
Okay, as we do here on Politically Basic, we're going to jump right in and get to it. You literally wrote the book on this. What is ranked choice voting?
Yeah, ranked choice voting is a reform proposal that's floating around out there in a lot of places that fundamentally changes the way that voting and the democratic process works. And while it seems like a new idea, it's actually a really old idea. This I just find fascinating. It was invented in Victorian England, so about 150 years ago. The reason we don't really know about it in the United States is that almost nobody uses it. And when it was tried in the United States about 100 years ago, everywhere where they tried it, rejected it. They got rid of it. So what is this system that seems new because it failed so long ago? Ranked choice voting is an election process where voters, instead of just voting for a candidate, voters rank the candidates. And this can work in different ways, but essentially you would rank someone first and then second and then third and then fourth and maybe fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, depending on the ranked choice voting system. Sometimes it goes, on into the teens if there are that many candidates running. And so, you can already imagine that the ballot's longer. This takes a lot longer for voters to figure out. But then when those ballots are cast, they have to be counted. So how do you count rankings instead of ordinary votes? Well, what they do is they count up the first place rankings on all the ballots. And if no candidate has a majority of first place rankings, then they look at which candidate was the least popular and they eliminate that candidate. And on all of the ballots that were cast where the least popular candidate was ranked first, then they take the second ranked candidate and sort of move that candidate up as if that was the first place on those ballots. And then they recount again. And if no candidate has a majority, then they do that again and again and again and again. And they do that until someone has a majority of the first place or the adjusted first place rankings on the ballots that are left. And it's important to note this is the ballots that are left because some people don't rank all those candidates, right? And so what happens if you only rank someone first? This actually happens in ranked choice voting elections all the time. Voters say, I don't like anybody but the one person I want to vote for. They rank that person first. If that candidate is eliminated, that ballot is completely thrown out, completely ignored from that point on. And so as they do these rounds of adjusting and recounting the ballots, you actually have fewer and fewer and fewer ballots, fewer and fewer votes that are being counted through the ranked choice voting process. So if you're confused, if you're listening to me out there and you're saying this is kind of confusing, then you get it. Because the fundamental problem with ranked choice voting is that it is not just kind of confusing, it is actually objectively confusing, which is to say voters don't know in a system like this what your vote will mean. Will your first place be the only vote that's ever counted? Will it come down to your third place? Will your ballot be thrown out? Voters actually don't know, can't know that ahead of time in a ranked choice voting election, which is probably the strangest thing about this supposedly democratic process called ranked choice voting, although there are a lot of other problems with it. I'm sure we'll talk about some of those. But Kyle, that is the basic ranked choice voting process. And I always feel bad when I explain it because it just is confusing. And as I say, when people get confused, you're really understanding why this is such a bad idea for the democratic process.
It sounds really confusing. And it also sounds like maybe not everyone knows what to do. And then people do different things. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you have the option to rank candidates. Say there are five. So number one, you put a one next to the person you like the best, and two next to the person you like the second best, and so on. But it sounds like a lot of people just choose their top choice and then they don't rank the rest of the candidates. Is that something that happens?
Yeah, that happens all the time in ranked choice voting elections. And, it can happen for a variety of reasons. Sometimes voters literally get a ranked choice voting ballot and they say, I don't know what this is. And so they vote for one candidate like they would with a normal ballot. Sometimes voters, get the ranked choice voting ballot and they say, look, you know, I kind of, I support this person. I kind of support this person, but I don't like any of these other people. I don't see a purpose in, saying that this one is my fourth choice versus my fifth choice. They're all terrible. And so they just rank, two or three candidates. Other times, frankly, voters just don't know, right? I mean, I work in politics all the time, and I still sometimes get a ballot for local elections where I always know who I'm going to vote for. Although sometimes, it's based on my wife doing the research and making a strong suggestion to me. But I always know who I'm going to vote for, but I don't always know about all the other candidates running for a city council seat, right? It takes a lot of time to research. If you have five candidates in a race and you have, maybe you have 10 or 15 or even 20 different elections on a ballot, right? If there's five people running and there's 20 elections on a ballot, that's 100 people that you are sort of all of a sudden expected to know, between these 100 people, who is my fourth choice, who's my fifth choice, who's my third choice. It's a lot of work. And so a lot of voters just, at a certain point, they say, I'm not going to put up with this anymore.
Hmm.
Here's the people I want to win, and I'm not going to rank everybody else.
This is bringing up an interesting thought for me, Trent. There's talk sometimes about voter suppression, right? Where maybe the pathway for people to be able to vote and vote accurately is somehow hindered, or it makes it harder for some groups than others. What you're describing in ranked choice voting makes it sound almost too complicated and too difficult for people to vote accurately. Would that be a legitimate criticism of it? I mean, it kind of sounds like a form of voter suppression to me.
Yeah, it certainly should be, that should be a real concern here. And, the irony is that a lot of the push for ranked choice voting comes from the political left, although there are folks, there are lots of Democrats who oppose ranked choice voting. But most of the push, pretty much all of the money comes from the left side of the political spectrum. And a lot of these groups, 5, 10 years ago, were lecturing everyone that asking people to show a photo ID in order to make sure that they really are the person who's registered to vote and they're voting in the right place, that was too hard for people. That was voter suppression, right? And I mean, pretty much everybody every week is showing a photo ID somewhere in their life, right? I mean, this is something that everybody does. It was, I think it was pretty silly to claim that was voter suppression. But you have these same groups that said that showing an ID was voter suppression that now are pushing for ranked choice voting. I mean, that's just wild. On the other hand, you do have some people out there, including some NAACP chapter leaders, who have said, look, ranked choice voting does have the potential to be voter suppression because voters who don't have a lot of information, who don't have a lot of time, are obviously going to have a much harder time with it. And the crazy thing is, I have been in conversations with people pushing for ranked choice voting, and one of the things that I've had a couple people say to me is, well, then those people just shouldn't vote. If they can't figure out this complicated ranked choice voting system, they just shouldn't vote. I mean, that is just a crazy place that we've come to, where you have people who are supposedly these pro-democracy reformers arguing that it's okay if the system that they're pushing is so complicated that people actually just don't vote, that maybe that's even a good thing. So it's a wild conversation that we're having about ranked choice voting, especially in light of some of the past debates we've had about elections.
Hmm. Trent, where is this happening? Are there certain states that adopt this model of voting, and where is it happening right now?
Yeah, so there are two states that use ranked choice voting statewide in most of their elections. Those states are Maine. That was the first state to adopt it for most, but not all of their elections at the state level. And then Alaska actually adopted it a few years ago. It was wrapped into this really confusing ballot measure. And so voters wound up voting for the ballot measure. A lot of them didn't realize that ranked choice voting was in there. And now they're actually going to vote this November on whether to repeal ranked choice voting in Alaska. So that will be interesting to watch. It's used in some local elections in California, and a lot of other places use it in, there's some cities that use it. And it's on the ballot this year in various ways in Oregon, Colorado, Idaho, Montana. Washington, D.C. Has it on the ballot there. Arizona has competing ballot measures trying to push ranked choice voting, also trying to prevent ranked choice voting. And in Missouri, they're going to vote on whether to ban ranked choice voting. There are actually 10 states now that have bans on ranked choice voting. So Missouri could become the 11th state to ban RCV. But yeah, this has popped up all around the country. There's just a few people who are basically kind of billionaires on the political left who are funding all of these campaigns all around the country, trying to push ranked choice voting. I don't think there's actually a lot of, it's not like there are a lot of citizens rising up and demanding this, but there are some very powerful folks who are pushing it.
Hmm. I've read that there's a question about its constitutionality. Is it, I mean, it's obviously happening in some states and it's going to a vote with the people. Is it truly constitutional, this type of voting?
Well, that's an interesting question because there are there are two ways to look at what is constitutional. One is to look at what the Supreme Court has said. The other is to just look at the text of the Constitution. If you look at the text of the Constitution, it really doesn't say very much at all about how we should vote. So I don't think it violates the plain text of the Constitution, but there are Supreme Court decisions that have, for example, ruled one person, one vote. The Constitution doesn't actually quite say that, right? But the court has said that, they think it's sort of implied by the 14th Amendment. And, I think there's a good argument that if the Supreme Court is right, if the 14th Amendment does mean that in some elections it has to be one person, one vote, well, ranked choice voting, again, you don't quite know what your vote is going to mean. You might vote in the election and your vote might not end up counting because your candidate was eliminated. It seems to fall in this sort of gray area where, I don't know that judges are going to strike it down, but I think that, just for ordinary voters to look at this and say this just doesn't live up to the standards that we think we should hold our elections to in our constitutional republic. I think that's a pretty fair conclusion to come to.
Yeah, several presidential elections ago, we had Bush v. Gore and the drama surrounding the hanging Chad. And that was litigated really heavily in Florida because it meant the determination of the winner of the presidential election. It was so confusing to people that the ballots couldn't be read, and some had been thrown out because you just couldn't make a decision between who the person was voting for. I mean, they literally were bringing people back in to look at their ballot and say, who did you vote for? It was a total mess. Do you think that ranked choice voting could follow that path and end up causing situations where it's got to be, litigated through the courts and through the legal system just so to clarify some of the confusion around it?
Well, we've actually already seen that in Alameda County, California, where, and this is just the most extreme example of this, where they had an election. So California allows ranked choice voting at the local level. So counties can opt in or not to using ranked choice voting. Alameda County, where Oakland is up in the Bay Area, they use ranked choice voting. And so they had an election in 2022 for school board in Oakland. And about 220 voters were either confused or were sort of protesting when they cast their ballots. We don't know why they did it, but they left the first preference blank, but they did vote for someone as their second preference, right? Maybe they just made a mistake. Maybe they said, I don't like any of these people enough to give them my first place vote, but I will cast a second place vote. I don't know. Uh, the people running the election were also confused about what to do with these ballots. And here's one of the problems with ranked choice voting. It's all computerized because
Mm.
it's basically impossible to go through this process of counting, adjusting, recounting votes. You can't do that in an efficient way in a large election without just feeding all the data into a computer system and having the computer do it, right? So you have a lot less transparency in these ranked choice voting elections. Well, they programmed the computer wrong. The computer was supposed to to move up those second place votes if the first place was blank, to just move them up right away and then count those ballots in the first round. But the computer was programmed to ignore those ballots in the first round, count them in the second round. There's also an option to just throw those ballots out, say that, they weren't filled out correctly. We're just going to throw them out. So, ranked choice voting creates the potential to make these kind of mistakes or have these kind of questions about ballots, and nobody knows what to do. Well, when they fed all this into the computer said, oh, this one candidate won. They swear the candidate in, the candidate starts serving on the school board, and then some outside experts did an audit of this election, really just trying to do research. They weren't suspecting that anything had gone wrong, but the numbers didn't match. It turned out that if the computer had been programmed correctly, a different candidate would have been eliminated, and the candidate who was eliminated would have won. It took them lawsuits. It took them 4 months to figure all this out, get the wrong winner off the school board, get the right winner on the school board. And the only reason they caught the mistake was just pure coincidence,
Mm.
right? Nobody knew there was a mistake. It was just these outside experts doing an audit for their own, for their own academic purposes, right? I mean, ranked choice voting, it lacks transparency. It
Mm.
creates the potential for voters to be confused, election officials to be confused. So yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. You look at these kind of recounts and things like Bush v. Gore. If we had ranked choice voting with those kind of close elections and that kind of litigation, it would make everything much worse, and we'd have those kind of disputes, I think, a lot more.
It's so dramatic. I didn't think this conversation was going to be this juicy, Trent. Okay, so also, and I don't try to go the negative Nancy route, I try to stay positive here. And I'm certainly not a conspiracy theorist, but if you wanted to get conspiratorial for a second, wouldn't it be a lot easier to game the system using ranked choice voting when machines are counting ballots? Because it's so much harder to untangle that on the back end.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing if you're feeding ballots through a tabulating machine that's just counting them, right? Because you can, I participated in this process a little bit before, right? You can take a stack of 100 ballots, feed them through a machine. You should have 100 votes, right? Once you feed them through the machine, and you can take those ballots and hand count them really quickly to make sure that the machine is accurate, right? And people can look at them, they know what they mean. It's, most ballots is going to be pretty obvious whether the machine's reading it right or not. With ranked choice voting, you can't really do that because you're having these rounds of adjusting, from second place votes to first place votes, and then third place votes to first place votes, and fourth place votes to first place votes. And so you can't just look at a ballot and know what it's supposed to mean. You can't just grab a stack of 100 ballots that have gone through the computer and then count them up and have that help you very much in making sure that the final, the computer process is happening honestly. So yeah, I think that, I think we have a problem with technology when it comes to elections, which is that you get some very smart people and maybe some nefarious people too, who say, well, everybody uses a smartphone. We all trust this technology all the time, and so we should just trust this technology with our elections. And I think it's a big mistake because it's not enough for elections to be honest and fair. I think this is a really important conclusion I came to when I used to work on just general election integrity. It's not enough for elections to be honest and fair. Elections have to be provably honest and fair, right? We have to be able to prove to people that the elections are honest and fair. And we may all run around with our phones, but I don't know what goes on in there. There's no way for me to know if we're feeding all this data into a computer system, let alone to go and prove that to my mom, right? That no, that the way the computer ran this algorithm is accurate. It's such a foolish path for us to go down with something as important as our elections. To put it all in a black box and have people in Silicon Valley or wherever say trust us. Even if they are honest, it's a terrible idea.
I want to read you the argument for it and get your take on this. I'm going to just straight read it to you. So the argument for ranked choice voting says, our choose one elections deprive voters of meaningful choices, create increasingly toxic campaign cycles, advance candidates who lack broad support, and leave voters feeling like their voices are not heard, and that ranked choice voting is the solution to fix all of that.
Yeah.
Well, that's a really interesting description. Toxic campaign cycles. Yeah. Sorry. And I mean, how does overcomplicating in a potentially unfair way fix toxic campaign cycles?
And this is the strange thing about our political moment right now. I mean, most Americans are frustrated with our politics, right? We feel like at least one side, whatever side we're on, maybe not, but the other side for sure has gotten more extreme. And most people recognize that there are a lot of voices on both sides that are not respectful, are not really trying to persuade people. They're just trying to score points and browbeat folks and all that, right? So there's a lot of legitimate frustration with our politics. But the strange thing is, that frustration is based on a comparison with, well, things used to be better, right? We had Ronald Reagan, we had Harry Truman, we had Lincoln and Washington and Adams and Madison, right? We've had all of these real statesmen and people who were thoughtful and respectful and built big coalitions, and we did all that with the normal election process, right? So it can't possibly be right that this normal election process that we have used since the beginning of our republic, and that most people most of the time use all around the world, just the intuitive way that if you go into a class of third graders and you say, we're going to vote on who's going to be our class representative, like they would just have a normal election, right? It's an intuitive system. That can't be the reason for the current problems that we have in our politics, right? And I think it's actually just exactly the other way around. It's the same kind of reformers who have pushed changes in the past that have weakened the political party structure, caused a lot more outside political money and kind of pop-up political campaign organizations that are not as accountable, right? Because it's not the candidate's campaign, it's not the political party, but it's some group that was just created. They're going to be around for 6 months and nobody really knows who they are. And, they don't care if you like them or not because they're going to disappear and they'll come back with a different name in a year or two. Right. I mean, that's really the problem. And that was all created by the last round of reformers who said, oh, we should, people are frustrated, so we should make a bunch of changes to the system and make things more complicated when it comes to political advertising. So, it's ironic that they make those claims. And the evidence shows that the claims really don't work out. Right. In Maine, where they have ranked choice voting, the politics have not gotten nicer. If anything, the research on this, which is it's kind of hard to do, it's a little hard to research how mean campaigns are, right? But there are some academics that tried to do this, and they found that it got nastier, and that there was more outside money after they brought ranked choice voting to Maine. So,
Hmm.
to the extent that we can test these claims, we find that they're false. But I just really think it's, without going and asking a bunch of professors to do research on this, it just doesn't make any sense that the political system that we've had from the beginning is causing this sudden change in our politics to be so nasty, if that's really what people are frustrated with.
Yeah, I've read some research too on that note that this type of voting is then also resulting in candidates who then assume, they win and assume this political leadership, and it's not going well. Like, it's not producing a good result. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I mean, there's this obsession amongst some people that claim that somebody has a majority, and ranked choice voting manufactures this really phony baloney majority, because it's throwing out some ballots and counting third preferences on other ballots. But yeah, you see more of the people we're electing, who are supposed to be they're supposed to be servants of the people. They're supposed to be representatives, but they want to claim that they are, that somehow, because they won a certain number of votes, they won a majority of votes, that they have some mandate to do whatever they want. I think that's another dangerous trend that we see in our electoral politics, and ranked choice voting just sort of feeds into that.
Hmm. Is this a growing trend? You mentioned that it's going to be on the ballot for voters to consider in several states. Do you think that they're trying to bring it back, and we're going to keep seeing that across the United States?
There's a lot of money behind it right now, and so I don't think they're going anywhere, in the next year or two, right? We're going to continue seeing the push for ranked choice voting. Looking at these ballot measures, I think that Missouri is going to ban ranked choice voting. I think Alaska probably will repeal it. On the other hand, I would suspect that in a couple of the states, at least where it's on the ballot, it may pass, because the folks pushing it have a lot of money to run their campaigns. So, I think a lot depends on what happens with voters this November. If a bunch of states start using ranked choice voting, on the one hand, they'll probably feel like there's this demand, this desire to shift to ranked choice voting, at least in certain places. But on the other hand, every time they adopt this, they wind up creating these disasters, like Alameda County, like they've had other issues with ranked choice voting in Arlington, Virginia, in New York City. So I think that if they do adopt this system in more places, we're just going to see more of the problems, more of the disasters. And I think ultimately I just don't believe that Americans are going to want this system for our elections. But I'm sure we're going to be having this argument at least for a few more years.
And what do you recommend that voters do if they don't want this? I mean, they can vote against it, but outside of exercising their right to vote, what is any recourse anyone has if they hear about the disaster that is RCV and they want to do something about it? What options are available to regular normies like us? Do you guys offer resources? What's the best way to speak out against it?
Yeah, we have resources at our stoprcv.com website. We've got handouts that folks can print out. There's a lot of materials there that folks can go and read, and anything on our website. I mean, people can take it, print it out, distribute it. There's no copyright limitations on what you can do with any of the content that we create at Stop RCV or Save Our States. We're just glad to have people spread it far and wide. But uh, talking to state legislators is really important, because they hear from all kinds of people about all kinds of things all the time. They can't be experts on everything. Don't assume that your state senator, your state representative, your city council member or county council member, don't assume that they know anything about this. They might not. And so there's a real opportunity for folks who are watching us out there to read some things about it, understand why it's such a bad idea, and then go and talk to your elected officials. Just make sure they know that they need to be against this, because we have seen, a lot of money spent to try to go out and lobby these elected officials. Usually, it's behind the scenes, right? They try to convince people that they should do this. Without really having a big public conversation about it, so elected officials need to know that you're paying attention, and they need to hear our side of the story.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you guys in the work that you're doing. And also today, Trent, just taking a look at both sides of this issue. Thanks for letting me play devil's advocate too. And really walking through this. I certainly understand it better. And you have absolutely made the case of why ranked choice voting is not fair. It's unfair to people running for office. It's unfair to the voters and ultimately to the communities in which that's happening. So make sure you guys check out stoprcv.com and take a look at those resources that they're offering, and get Trent's book. It's called just that, The Case Against Ranked Choice Voting. Grab one for a friend too. Trent, we're so grateful to you for walking us through this, helping us to understand this concept so much better. So thank you. Thanks for coming on the show today.
You're welcome. It's a real privilege to be here. Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Politically Basic. We're committed to breaking down the basics so you get to decide. Be sure to check us out at politicallybasic.com and follow us at Politically Basic so you don't miss an episode. And we'll see you next time.